The first set of files related to the appointment of Peter Mandelson as Britain's ambassador to Washington has been released. The files, which are being made available after a vote in Parliament, show the official information Keir Starmer had access to when appointing Mandelson to the plum job. And on Mandelson's relationship to Epstein, this is what Starmer was told all the way back in 2024. A relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. You can see his memorandum-style document, and it effectively relays absolutely everything that was already in the public realm, from his relationship to Prince Andrew, to that very famous JP Morgan report, which relayed, some pretty damning connections between Epstein and Mandelson. So that's what Starmer was told at the time. It doesn't really tell us anything we didn't already know, of course. The files also have the summaries of meetings from last year, which are a bit more interesting. These are fact-finding meetings hosted by one of Keir Starmer's advisors after emails were released from Bloomberg showing how close Epstein and Mandelson were. This is a meeting with Matthew Doyle, at that point the head of communications for 10 Downing Street, who's put in charge of vetting Mandelson. Summary of call: Lord Mandelson is a personal friend of Matthew Doyle, who was vetting him. So while he doesn't recall specific instances, he would certainly have seen him at social events around December 2024. Matthew Doyle said he would not have had a unilateral meeting with Lord Mandelson to discuss the appointment. Matthew Doyle said he did, however, have a number of conversations with Morgan McSweeney that were one-to-ones. Recalls a number of wider political meetings around the time, some more formal than others. Matthew Doyle recalls some back and forth with Morgan McSweeney, which resulted in 3 specific questions for Lord Mandelson to answer in respect of Jeffrey Epstein. Possibly some discussion of Global Counsel as well. That, of course, was his lobbying shop. It's now gone insolvent. Matthew Doyle recalls there were interactions with Elisa Terry and Jonathan Powell. That's the foreign policy supremo at 10 Downing Street with Starmer right now, though not details. Matthew Doyle believes Jonathan Powell was particularly cautious about the appointment. Matthew Doyle does not recall any unique correspondence or a specific letter from Lord Mandelson to PM, as in Starmer, about the appointment. Now, if you recognise Matthew Doyle's name, I've said it enough times, it's probably because over Christmas it became big news that he campaigned for a friend after that person had been charged with child sex offences. They were subsequently found guilty of possessing images of a child as young as 10. So the fact he and Mandelson have enough in common to form a close friendship might not be that much of a surprise to viewers. The other fact-finding meeting was with Starmer's national security advisor, Jonathan Powell. Jonathan Powell found the appointment process unusual of Lord Mandelson, weirdly rushed, noted Neen Pandit. Jonathan Powell doesn't recall any specific meetings on this that he was involved in, though there were a few conversations. Jonathan Powell raised concerns about the individual and reputation of Morgan McSweeney. McSweeney responded the issues had been addressed. What issues? There's a clear direction here, right? Morgan McSweeney has a lot to answer for, already very, very clear. In terms of PM engagement, Jonathan Powell believes the PM may have had a couple of political conversations around this, but Powell was not party. In respect of correspondence from LM, Lord Mandelson, to the PM, that's Starmer, Jonathan Powell didn't see anything himself. Powell had a vague feeling there was some incoming communication from Lord Mandelson to someone, but has low confidence in that or what it was. Jonathan Powell noted FCDO, PUS, so these are civil service acronyms, was Philip Barton at the time, who also had reservations around the appointment. So this is very important. Jonathan Powell is one of the most senior people within the Starmer administration, the foreign policy supremo, the former chief of staff to Tony Blair, right? Very accomplished man. And the most senior civil servant who was also involved in this also had reservations. What's clear is that the vetting is being done by a close friend of Mandelson, and it seems it's being pushed through by Morgan McSweeney. Now, Kieran, I said after that first screenshot, it doesn't tell us anything new, but in a way it does, because, of course, Starmer has said he didn't know a lot of things. People will remember Starmer saying, I wasn't aware of this or that conversation, relationship with Lord Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein. Yep. People then said, like you and I on this show, but hold on, there was so much stuff like the JP Morgan report in the public realm. We now know the JP Morgan report was among the details actually disclosed to the PM before he made that decision.
Yeah, and I don't like to be proven right about terrible things, but we said it's implausible. I remember the phrase we used at the time. It's completely implausible. And that this only had two outcomes for Keir Starmer. Either he knew and he was willing to appoint the guy nonetheless, which is wicked, actually, given the nature of the allegations against him, or he didn't know, and in which case he is grotesquely incompetent for not knowing. And one of the most important things for a political leader is to have knowledge of every aspect of what's going on in their office. So we said, didn't we? It's completely implausible. It's been shown to be completely implausible by this. I think this is new information, really. It's new information. We suspected it were the case, but now it's confirmed that Keir Starmer must have known all of these details. There's nowhere for him to hide on this. I don't know if it will create a scandal. These dropped just after PMQ so that he couldn't face scrutiny on them, which is highly strategic and I would say very mendacious, dishonest. But this is, I don't see anywhere for him to hide now with this. It's in black and white. And the Morgan McSweeney stuff as well. Look, it's so clear. If anybody doesn't believe that simply what happened here was Keir Starmer knew, he outsourced his brain to Morgan McSweeney, using his brain, said to him, we have to hire Peter Mandelson, and Keir Starmer obliged. If anybody doesn't believe that, I've got some magic beans to sell them.
Yeah, proper garden rake stuff. And the one big decision that Keir Starmer has made, where he's been proven correct, is, guess what? This war, Morgan McSweeney nowhere to be seen. There's something to that, isn't there? Something that is perhaps even more interesting in the release are the details of how Jeffrey Epstein came to meet Tony Blair in 10 Downing Street in 2002. We were already aware of this meeting, but not necessarily the details. This is an email from Mandelson to Jonathan Powell, who, as I've already said, at that time was Blair's chief of staff. Do you remember when Clinton saw TB, Tony Blair? He said he wanted to introduce his travelling friend Jeffrey Epstein to TB. This was frustrated, TB said at the time, in the office for reasons he says he was unclear about. I think TB would be interested in meeting Jeffrey. Now, this is Mandelson pushing this. Who's also a friend of mine because Jeffrey is an active scientific catalyst entrepreneur, as well as someone who has his finger on the pulse of many worldwide markets and currencies. He's young and vibrant. He's safe, whatever that means. And Clinton is now doing a lot of traveling with him. I think that is really, really important. I mentioned to TB that Jeffrey is in London next week, and he said he'd like to meet him. I've ascertained from Jeffrey that he is flexible. He could be here anytime from Tuesday onwards to fit around the diary, but would obviously need to know how reasonably quickly as to reschedule accordingly. I mean, this is a really important point, right? You know, Mandelson was getting time for Epstein to speak to the PM with no real reason beyond he's got his finger on the pulse. I think it gives you a little bit of a glimpse into how the Blair Downing Street operation worked. This is the briefing note given to Blair on the day of his meeting with perhaps the most famous paedophile in the world, Jeffrey Epstein. We've highlighted an important bit here. The background on Epstein is that he was very rich. Okay, great. He's worth about a couple of $100 million at the time, maybe even a billionaire. $30 million home in New York, plus a 10,000-acre ranch in New Mexico, close to the Duke of York. He seems to have met Prince Andrew through Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine, with whom he has an on-off relationship, visited Sandringham. Peter says that Epstein now travels with Clinton, and Clinton wants you to meet him. He thinks you would find a worthwhile conversation with him about A, science, and B, international economic and monetary trends. Kieran, this is bizarre. Basically, Mandelson is saying Blair should meet Epstein because Epstein's rich. I mean, that to me sums up New Labour, right? You get half an hour with the Prime Minister, the most important person in this country, who's meant to be on top of all the problems facing 68 million people today, 60 million plus people back then in the early 21st century. You get to meet him just because he's rich.
It's absolutely shocking. And when I shared something about this that was on Novara Live, actually, a few weeks ago, I got a lot of people saying, you must be pro-Trump. You're trying to kick up dirt and, change the conversation to good old Bill. No, absolutely not. All the victims deserve justice, whether they were abused by Democrats or Republicans or neither of the above. About New Labour, yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that New Labour was a kind of, especially through Mandelson, I think, mainlined through the person of Peter Mandelson into the bloodstream of New Labour. It was a project built around a kind of worship of money, the cult of money. He famously said, of course, we're intensely relaxed about people getting fabulously wealthy or phenomenally wealthy. I forget the exact phrase. I think money was a big part of it. And those who know Tony Blair, and I don't think it's idle gossips, but certainly not in this context. Those who know Tony Blair say that he loves money. Doesn't surprise me. I think that money played a central role in the kind of New Labour aesthetic as much as anything else. And so it doesn't surprise me at all. But it was it's a deep rot, I think, that still dogs the Labour Party to this day.
Yeah. It's a millstone around its neck.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about how degenerate British politics has become the last 25 years on both sides, but I have to say, really, it does start with New Labour. Yes, of course, Thatcher was bad, Major was bad, but for very different reasons. The idea, and this is crazy, with the vetting of Mandelson as this country's ambassador to Washington, of course, Mandelson, very close friends with a paedophile, that was conducted by Matthew Doyle, a man who campaigned for a candidate who had been suspended from the Labour Party and was subsequently found to be a paedophile. You know, it starts to make somebody like Alex Jones seem like a sensible, thoughtful voice on politics. You know, it's absolutely outrageous, and it completely corrodes trust in the political process. Hey, you know, I want corroding trust, certainly in the Labour Party. They don't deserve it. But in the process, more generally, that's always a worry. Final comments?
Yeah. I think actually one key difference between New Labour and Thatcher's successive governments throughout the 1980s, is that Thatcher was obsessed with money, and she was obsessed with unleashing market forces to make a new plutocratic or oligarchic class. But it is quite true what our mutual foe, friend, I don't know what he is, frenemy, Peter Hitchens says, which is that the New Labour was the first government to become completely obsessed with celebrity and glamour.
Yeah.
So Thatcher, the money stuff is absolutely right, and that's when it really starts. And but what New Labour does is it combines that with this sense of celebrity and glamour and 24-hour television. And that's, of course, where Alistair Campbell comes in. That's where you have Noel Gallagher coming to Downing Street, Ross Kemp, who was a huge celebrity at the time, seems strange now, coming to Downing Street. So it's that kind of synthesis, it's that combination of Thatcherite worship of money with a quite unique and, up until that point, unprecedented obsession with image, celebrity, glamour, and all of that.